Hey everybody, Cory from Aquarium Co-op. Today we're talking about how do you set up a shrimp tank. We're going to focus on neocardinia or cherry shrimp, basically the ones that you should be starting with. They look great, they're easy to care for, and I think it's what everyone's kind of thinking when they start. If you're setting up something for crystal shrimp or a salawazi shrimp or a saltwater shrimp, those would be different guides. This one's going to make it easy on how to be successful with cherry shrimp. So, what do you need in a shrimp tank? That's, let's get a list going of what you need. So I think you need about 2 inches of gravel. That's going to help with plants and overall just create a good bacterial colony. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Fish actually like to feed on bacteria and things. And so that's going to be very, very important. You could do active soils and things like that, but just know that you can run into pH problems. So when we're first trying to do shrimp for our first time, I like making it as easy as possible with the fewest number of variables. And so that's why I recommend just an average basic gravel. There's no pH fluctuations or anything to worry about. Next up, you want a sponge filter, something like this, or a sponge to go on the intake of your hang-on back or canister filter. If you don't have that, your shrimp will get sucked in. And when you do have babies, they'll get sucked in and the food will get sucked in. And basically, it's a giant blender for your fish if you don't have sponge. The sponge is also very good at growing bacteria. Again, okay, so that's 2 things with bacteria. We're going to talk about bacteria a lot because that is the key to shrimp. So get yourself something. I highly recommend sponge filter with an air pump, gentle flow, and not a lot of moving parts. Next up, we've got live plants. Now, you can kind of do any that you want. I find easy plants like maybe a dwarf aquarium lily, maybe some Pogo stellatus octopus, some cryptocorns, some anubias, some java ferns, anything that can kind of take low light and is easy because we're focusing mostly on the shrimp in this tank, not so much the plants. Like, yes, you want a beautiful tank that has both, but if you've never kept shrimp before, the primary goal, successfully keeping shrimp and probably making some babies. Once you can do that, you can tailor the tank to harder plants. So lots of plants, create surface area. You'll grow a little bit of algae too, which they also like to forage on. And really, in a shrimp tank, you want as much stuff for them to crawl on as possible because surface area is where they're going to find their little bits of food. And if you just had a bare bottom tank, you basically just have a little area. The more height you add to it, the more surfaces they can find shelter in and also find food. Now this next one, a piece of wood, is not typically recommended by everybody. I find it to be essential if you're new. Now, do all shrimp have to have it? No. Do I think it is a huge boon in your fish tank? Yes. So getting a piece of wood not only looks cool and breaks up the plants and everything, but as it's sitting in the water, it's continually rotting. That sounds scary, I know. But bacteria are eating that piece of wood, and we've already established, like, wait, we like bacteria. The shrimp like to eat on it. So by having that big, not it doesn't have to be a big chunk, it could be real spindly and all that, but by putting that in, you've added another source of food and height and all of that to make it even better for these shrimp. Next, something you don't need. You do not have to have a heater. Mostly if it's in your home, it's good for them. Now, I've kept cherry shrimp outside where there's been 2 inches of ice over the top of the pond. They still survive. They stop breeding, though. And I've done it in bedrooms, spare bedrooms that have no heat that get real cold because we don't heat it over there. I also do it in this room and in my house, and that works out pretty well. So I don't think you have to have a heater. It's one more layer of complication you don't need and an expense you don't have to have. Now, if you were doing fish, which I do not recommend, I don't recommend mixing fish with your shrimp, especially for your first tank. Once you have, if you've made a couple hundred shrimp, go ahead and try them in other tanks, but for your first journey into shrimp only basically. Maybe a little bit of snails, but shrimp only. There's one more must-have, food. They want to eat all that bacteria and all that kind of stuff, yes, but I highly recommend getting a food that will go all around the water column and settle on all the surfaces. For me, that would be the Magic Small Fish Feed. There's Bacter AE, there's other ones out there, but this one, in my opinion, is affordable. We make it, they love it. I grow a lot of shrimp on it. It's got krill in it, so it makes them even more red. Got a lot of perks to it. You don't want to go too crazy on the food, but you will need some food to supplement. Even though everything we're doing in this aquarium is meant to provide food, you still will need to actually feed them. It's kind of like if you grow a garden at your house. Like, yes, it's going to supplement, but you still have to go to the grocery store and buy stuff. It won't be totally self-sustainable unless you're only going to keep like one shrimp. But even then, I would still feed it. So another thing I consider to be a need in your fish tank is a source of calcium. I like using calcium blocks. ZoomEd makes some. We have one coming out. There's Wonder Shells. There's a lot of products out there, but basically a calcium block that will sit in the water and they can go feed on it, and also it'll add a little bit of calcium to the water and just ensure that they've got enough for molting and everything, because I can't be sure of your water structure, and so I would put that in the need category, some source of calcium to help your invertebrates. Next, we come up to, what do shrimp like in their tank? So we have the have to haves. Now, what is it like? Hey, that's pretty good to have. I consider that to be top of leaves. So these are just big leaves that sit in your tank and they rot. Kind of like more wood. You could have tons of wood, but the leaves, you can buy them in 20 packs, basically. We sell them. And you just put them in, they'll float for a while, then they'll eventually sink. And if you've ever felt leaves on the ground outside out, they're slimy, that slime is exactly what the shrimp want to be eating on. And so that's something you can kind of tuck behind some plants or the wood. And once it kind of goes away and you're like, oh, it's just a couple of veins on that leaf, you replace it. And it's just kind of an insurance policy to make sure you've always got extra food and extra spot for them to eat. The next thing that is a nice to have is mulm or fish poop or snail poop. And what that means is if you can take a tank that had fish, like let's say I took the tank behind me and I got all the fish out of there, and it just had lots of poop in the gravel and everything, that would be biologically very active and super good for the shrimp. And so maybe you vacation a few shrimp from another tank you have in that tank while you're letting it get seasoned, let them poop everywhere, maybe get a couple snails early on so that they will be eating and pooping, and so that they will have that food source. Long term, though, I don't like to mix them with fish for your first group, because it adds a layer of complication. They can prey on them, they can eat them, they can harass them. You're trying to feed the fish, and then this is going on. Like you end up changing what you're doing there. You're gonna all of a sudden have to change more water, do more things, and again, we want to be successful with our first shrimp tank. The next thing that is a like to have is fertilizer. Without fertilizer, your plants are going to just struggle to get by. You might even lose some of them, but the easier ones to grow, like maybe a Nubius and some Java ferns, they might limp along. But by adding fertilizer, I recommend Easy Green. We sell it. Your plants will get taller and bigger, and you'll get more for your money. And then you've got more surface area, which leads to more bacteria, which leads to more shrimp and more healthy shrimp. So while not absolutely mandatory, I personally always use it, but it's not a have to. I don't know what your budget is, but if it allows that $20 basically, or it's a nano tank probably, so I would grab it at the $10 level. Now, that brings up a good point. I haven't talked about tank size up until now. For tank size, I recommend anything over 5 gallons. Yes, can it be done in 1 gallon? It can. Can it be done in 2 gallons? Yes, sir. Can it be done in a 500 gallon? Yes. Any size container can basically keep a shrimp alive. But what's going to make it as easy as possible for you, I find 5 to 10 gallons is the sweet spot. Easy to do water changes. It doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to buy the tank and the equipment and the plants and the sponge filter and you can get something like 10 shrimp, and in a 10 gallon, wow, I can see them. I'm enjoying this. You put them into a 55 gallon, I don't think I have any shrimp. Where are they? And so 5 to 10 gallons I find to be perfect sweet spot for starting a colony and really getting it thriving. Even if you go, I've done 10 different shrimp before and you're doing a new colony, I still find it better to use a smaller tank to get it going. You can keep tabs on them easier. Now, how long do you have to cycle the tank before adding shrimp? I'm not a fan of cycling altogether. We'll put that aside. I like a seasoned aquarium. And so I've got a whole video. We'll kind of link up to that up top and at the end here, which I highly recommend you watch if you're new to the idea of seasoned. I think it takes 60 days to season an aquarium. And I ran into this mistake many times when I was getting into professionally breeding shrimp. I did it many, many, many years ago. And before I worked at a store, before I own a store, all of that. And I was going to get rich on shrimp. And eventually I made okay money and I supported myself. But at the beginning, I did not understand how critical all the bacteria and all the surface area was to having lots of shrimp. And so in these 60 days, you want poop to build up, you want algae to build up, you want plants to build up, you want the wood to rot more, you want all of that to go on. And I find, honestly, it takes about 60 days. Have I snuck some in there at 5 weeks? Yes, it's happened. It's harder. But the more you can see your tank just be seasoned, everything's growing. The plants are growing, the algae's growing. You just see life happening. That snail that snuck in on a plant, it's doing its work. All of that's happening. Your fertilizer's going in, all of that. That's when it's time. And if you watch the video, you'll see that that takes about 60 days, honestly, to really get that. And every day, every week, every month that goes on, your tank will get more and more stable. And you'll produce more and more shrimp, and it'll be less and less headache. Which leads to the next point. Are shrimp tanks low maintenance? Yes, I think they should be very, very, very low maintenance. And some would say they could be no maintenance. I don't believe in that. I feel like, there's always a little bit to be doing, whether it's trimming a plant a little bit. Ooh, the poop's kind of building up over there. Or, I should probably clean the sponge filter because it's been a year. Whatever that's going to look like. With a low bioload, which shrimp are very low bioload, which means they don't make a lot of poop or a lot of mess, and you have a lid on the tank, I recommend about 25% of a water change once a month. It can be a little bit less. It can be longer. Originally, I wrote maybe every 3 months. It just depends on what you're doing. How heavy are you feeding or not feeding? And, do you have a top? Because you'll get a lot of water evaporation. You don't want to just top off. You want to change a little bit of water instead of topping off. But the overall goal is to do almost nothing. Because the less you do, and you've set up this ecosystem, this seasoned aquarium, the more the shrimp will just do better. The colors will get better. They'll make babies. They'll make you happy. You'll be able to see them. They'll come out. They won't be afraid. The flow's not too high. All of these things are going to be beneficial for you, and I highly recommend that you let it season, then you add your shrimp, and then you do very minimal things, and you're feeding sparingly, and you've got leaves in there, you've got wood in there, you've got plants in there, and you'll just enjoy them.